All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Cambridge Intelligence webinar. It's great to have you all here with us today. My name is Raphaël, and I'm the head of partnerships here at Cambridge Intelligence. Joining me today as our main presenter is my colleague Jan, our product manager.
Hello, everyone.
We've got a fantastic session lined up. Today, we're diving into multi-domain visualization for actionable intelligence. We all know the struggle. We are absolutely swimming in data from different sources and trying to make sense of it all at once. It's incredibly tough to do that. So today we are going to explore how we can bridge that gap. To guide us through all of this, I'll be handing things over to my colleague Jan in just a moment. But first, a quick piece of housekeeping on how today's session will run. So Jan will run through the main presentation first, and then we have reserved plenty of time to dive into your questions. So please don't hesitate to drop your thoughts or questions in the chat panel on the right side, I guess, of the screen. At any point during the talk, I'll be gathering them up, and we get as many as we can during the live Q&A at the end of the session. With that, let's go into it. Jan, I'll hand the floor over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm hoping you can hear me loud and clear. Nice. And you can hopefully see my screen. Thank you everyone for joining. This is essentially a rerun of the presentation that I gave at ISS World Europe in Prague last month. I'm assuming most of you didn't get a chance to catch that. So it's great to have you here today. So the agenda for our webinar today, I'll just give the briefest of introductions to who we are. I'm hoping most of you know that. If you don't, let us know in the chat. Happy to have a sort of separate session, with you, kind of talk you through who we are and what we do. After that brief introduction, I'll sort of kind of present our hypothesis on the challenge that is posed by the kind of modern fused intelligence approach, specifically for visualization. And then I'll talk you through our sort of kind of product development approach to this, how our various SDKs can come together to kind of tackle this type of problem. And we'll sort of look at each one kind of individually. And then we're going to go through a few live demonstrations of some multimodal user interfaces that we've kind of built together using our toolkits for various kind of intelligence use cases. And we should, as Raphael mentioned, have plenty of time at the end for Q&A. So please do drop your questions into the chat. Right, let's get cracking. So, like I said, I'll keep this brief. I'm hoping most of you have heard of us. That's why you're here, signed in today. But in case you haven't, the strapline is the one thing and the only thing we do at Cambridge Intelligence is build software development kits that help our customers build user interfaces for visualizing, interacting with, and making decisions from complex connected data. Now, the way we do this, as I said, is we provide a number of different software development kits. We started about 16 years ago now, first in the graph visualization, or as you folks in Intel like to call it, link analysis space. That was with our Keylines JavaScript SDK. And then we kind of grew that portfolio with regraph, which is a kind of React version of essentially the same thing. And then we've also sort of added to the portfolio over time. So we sort of over on the right-hand side, about 6 years ago, we added in chronograph, which is kind of designed for temporal kind of timeline visualization at scale. And then finally, last year, we launched for general availability MapWeave, our geospatial SDK for connected data visualization. Now, naturally, as these are software development kits, they can kind of work in whatever space, and market you're in. However, given our history, where we started very much in that kind of Intel police fraud detection kind of space with Keylines all those years ago, they, all of our products and many of our customers have kind of been geared up for this, for building applications within that sort of intelligence, law enforcement, sanctions, geo, and all these sort of, kind of connected spaces. And that's, kind of built up both in terms of the feature set, but also in terms of the credibility and the sort of, operational deployments of our customers' applications that include our toolkits over those years. And again, if you have any more questions about, who we are and what we do on the whole, please do drop them in the chat or let us know, and we can have a follow-up conversation. So what's the challenge when it comes to kind of fused intelligence? And this is something that I sort of reflected on a fair bit after coming back from Prague back in June. It's been another fantastic year, another fantastic session at ISS. If you haven't been, I can highly recommend it. It's a phenomenal event for all things intelligence, vendors, end users, myriad of companies providing fantastic data sets. And the theme, a little bit to my surprise, but ultimately kind of unsurprising, I guess, is still very much data fusion. All the vendors are talking it, all the system integrators are talking it, and the users continue having challenges with it. If you kind of put aside the hardware folks at that event, the software space, I reckon you could probably slice it down the middle. On the one hand, you had the vendors and the sort of solution builders, kind of building various types of applications, which ultimately take different types of intelligence and fuse them together for the end user to kind of, consume as fast as possible and kind of draw conclusions, make decisions, build their cases, whatever it might be. And then on the other hand, you've got data providers, right? People with, kind of web-based platforms or sort of, deployable data sets or, just purely APIs, a myriad of different sources of intelligence data. And the theme continues to be, how do you bring all this together, and into a coherent single pane of glass type picture? Now, we've been in the space, like I said, for about 16 years, pushing the narrative of link analysis and using, tools like ours to kind of help users interact with data, which lends itself naturally to be visualized with or walked through as networks. But these days, there's a myriad of other sources and types of data that one wouldn't naturally think necessarily of as a network, but they're certainly related to it or could be, and that's going to be the theme of the conversation here. So the type of things I'm talking about is like, geospatial movement data, time-based kind of, temporal data sets, patterns of life, video feeds, imagery. The list goes on. So and the challenge which I think this poses is that while the industry has standardized on things like link analysis for sort of navigating some of these data, I would say that it hasn't kind of sort of met the challenge of fusing all these different types of intelligence, not necessarily into a single visualization, but into a kind of a seamless experience that continues to allow that analyst, that investigator, that person building up a case to, sort of navigate through the connected nature of this various bits of data in the best way possible. So our approach to this problem, to this challenge, is a multi-modal visualization one. And this is the reason we've been growing our product portfolio the way we have been. It's perhaps a very simplified way to look at the world, but I reckon if you consider a lot of the use cases that you'll encounter within the intelligence domain, the type of data, then the visualization can be kind of cut across these three domains. You've got time, you've got space, and you've got connections. And just going through a few examples, right? This might be law enforcement data, things like how are you visualizing modern lawful intercept from a mobile a modern mobile phone, which no longer just gives you calls and text message data, but gives you location data, gives you social media data, all kinds of things. Maritime intelligence, you might want to track hundreds, thousands of vessels around your coast, But at the same time, you want to be able to dig in to the beneficial ownership, which is a network of a particular vessel, or see the connections of ownership between different vessels doing suspicious things. Pattern of life analysis is another lovely example. This is, this is spatio-temporal, right? Thousands, hundreds of thousands of mobile devices moving through a city over time. What are the patterns? What are the outliers? Financial crime, this is, it's not just about, who's sending money to whom. It's that, exact sequence of these events that takes place that really matters, and that kind of is important to building up a case like that. So we're going to take a look at each one of these kind of briefly individually, and then we're going to kind of go into sort of the combined interfaces after that. So naturally, we're going to start with graph visualization, which you'll hopefully know us all for. So this is, like I said, our key lines, JavaScript and regraph, React SDKs. And amongst other things, these allow you to, build experiences, for example, for navigating open source intelligence data. So here we built this demonstrator with data from our friends over at Shadow Dragon. They gave us access to their open source social media kind of API. And we just looked at two sources of data here, the company's house data and LinkedIn data, and built out this little graph kind of navigation experience. You can maybe spot there, kind of centered around David Beckham. And looking at being able to expand from that one entity into sort of all the entities in which they are involved, or companies they own, kind of where the director of, and then kind of continually being able to expand from that. So building up an experience where you don't have to splash the entire massive complicated graph at the user, but providing you the tools to build experience that let the user naturally navigate and investigate this network the way that it best suits them. Use our automatic layouts, to kind of create ideal visualizations, which that can be exported, or snapshots that can be created and then revisited time and again. Really important when you're sort of building up a case that you, for example, need to take to court. That ability to kind of faithfully reproduce exactly that view, which led you to the conclusions that you've sort of arrived at. And then also things like, animating through changes in the network. Like, for example, many of the solutions in this space, offer users the ability to kind of reconcile what an algorithm might detect as identical entities. So maybe you've got multiple data sets that you're fusing together, and you've got David Beckham's name spelled differently in every one of them, right? Many solutions out there have, algorithms that detect these kind of things, suggest to the user whether they sort of agree and want to kind of, fuse these David Beckhams all into one, and our layouts, our animations, these kind of, they allow this sort of thing to happen very seamlessly within the UI, provide all the interactions and hooks for you to sort of do that. So that's just a very, very brief snapshot of our graph visualization capabilities within this space, but we'll look at a lot more in due course. So let's then move on to the time domain. So this is our chronograph product. And when we developed chronograph, we were still very much thinking about the graph thing. You've got nodes, you've got edges. But what we wanted to be able to do was, in a standard link analysis graph, you might have entities, which in this case are individuals sending emails to each other. So if you've got 10 emails between two people, you'd have two nodes, one for each person, and you'd have either, if you're doing it wrong, 10 links like an onion kind of between them for every email, or if you do it right, you've got one link with a little glyph that says 10 on it. But what you don't have a sense of at all in that visualization is when exactly did those emails happen? Maybe it's really important that those emails are actually being sent at 3 a.m. on a Saturday. Maybe they're being sent to multiple individuals from one particular person. Maybe there's a sequence of emails that get sent, right, between various people in an organization, which actually help you build a case. That's what chronograph is designed to do. And it's designed to do that at scale. So it will scale to hundreds, thousands of nodes, of entities, these names of people you see along the left-hand side there. and it will scale comfortably to hundreds of thousands, up to 1 million events on the timeline. And again, we'll see why this is relevant momentarily. And then finally, and most recently, as I said, we released MapWeave, our geospatial SDK. So say, for example, you've got two seemingly distinct networks, under a couple of sanctioned individuals. These individuals own companies. Those companies have various boards of directors, and the companies also own various high-value assets. And maybe a couple of those assets are vessels which had a ship-to-ship transfer event, and you, as the analyst looking into these organizations, want to investigate that event. Maybe you want to see where it happened in the world, what happened before it, what happened after. So MapWeave allows you to take those vessel nodes, and they are very much nodes, as you'll see in a second, still in the network. But now it can automatically plot those vessels on their observations and sort of automatically interpolated trajectories for where they'd been. And you can use our time bar, or you can use chronograph, as you'll see, to kind of sort of filter through time and watch those vessels move along their trajectories. And then you can take it one step further. You can say, let's say you started from this view and one of these vessels, but you don't know the other one. And now you've seen them engage in a ship-to-ship transfer event, and you want to look into that vessel. Well, it could be as simple as clicking on it and changing the layer to see that same ownership network that we saw on the graph, but now spatially, spread out over the globe, including nodes which don't have to have geolocations, including nodes which, like these vessels, might be moving, so they're not in one static location as kind of time goes. All of that's possible with MapWeave because it's built on this concept of different, spatial layers. There's our network layer, which allows, kind of the link analysis on maps. There is the observations layer, which allows you to then take those nodes and actually kind of plot them over time in different places. And then it's all kind of brought together with a sort of standard GeoJSON layer that lets you do nice things like you see here, color different sort of, exclusive economic zones of different countries and their waters, and detect when, vessels intersect them and so on. So that's MapWeave in a nutshell. All right, let's switch to some live demonstrations and look at how these come together for different use cases. So we're going to start by looking at a anti-money laundering sort of demonstration. So here we are looking at the sort of chart and the kind of the temporal bit, the chronograph on the left-hand side. So let's start with the chart. So we've got a number of different accounts belonging to various individuals, and these accounts are exchanging funds. So we can see the sort of the arrows for the movement of funds, and it's important to note that these well, first of all, some of these accounts belong to the same individuals, and as if you're aware of our graph visualization capabilities, you'll know we can do things like put these different nodes into what we call combos, and that can automatically create what we call combo links. So we've just sort of linked Woody's multiple accounts into a single node and sort of aggregated the links automatically there. So that's on the chart side. And then the other thing to note is that, like I said, we're not showing every single transaction from Dragon Casino to Woody's checking account. We're just showing the aggregate of all the transactions, including the sum. Notice what happens on the timeline on the chronograph side when I hover over one of these. So one of these links actually corresponds to 3 different transactions that we can see over there on the sort of center top of the timeline. And so this is where the timeline comes in. We still see the same groups, the combos. So, like, for example, Woody's 2 accounts here. So all those nodes are kind of represented as these timeline entities. And you'll notice as I kind of hover over them, they sort of light up on the chart. But rather than seeing the transactions aggregated into one sort of transaction between them, we see every single individual transaction. Now, why does that matter? Well, for one, it allows us to do things like this. So because we can store sort of date time ranges on nodes and links in the graph visualization, that allows us to then link that to chronograph and specifically its range event. And as I change that range on the timeline, I can automatically sort of hide, show, or foreground, background the transactions and the individuals that are involved in that on the chart side. Now, why does that matter for a case like this? Well, if we turn on the flagged transactions, right, again, ignore the timeline just for a second and just look at the chart. Because we're looking into this network, right, we already know they're dodgy, right? So it's a little bit unsurprising that, you know, most of the transactions here are kind of turning red. So in that sense, it's not terribly helpful. But what I really want to know is I want to see that money flow, you know, the sequence of the movement of monies throughout this network, and how is it actually kind of making its way through. And that's what chronograph enables me to do. You sort of see the sequence we've got here. So let me zoom in on these initial transactions. Okay, you can see they sort of start from these cash deposits and they go to these various business accounts. And now as we scroll, we sort of start to reveal, you know, how this money is making its way through this network, and ultimately, where does it end up going, right? Because that's sort of critical to our case, right? Who's the sort of ultimate beneficiary of all this naughtiness, right? And it's this person down here. So hopefully that gives you a sort of a sense of the value that each of these visualization brings to this particular case, and that without one or the other, you don't see the full picture. So let's look at something a little bit more complicated. So this is our pattern of life showcase. So here now we're swapping the chart out and we're replacing it with MapWeave. And rather than looking at a sort of a network data set, we're looking at, in this particular case, 1 million observations of taxis moving around the streets of Porto. So this is using the famous Porto taxis open source data set, which kind of tracked about 500 taxis over the course of a year. We're just looking at 20 odd taxis over the course of 2 months, and that's sort of equivalent to a million observations here. And you'll notice I can interact with every single one of these. When I hover over one, I get a tooltip telling me which taxi and the date time. And this is all in the browser, right? There's no backend running here whatsoever. We can efficiently load in this level of data and you can interact with it. Great. So what, right? So this is where the chronograph piece comes in on the left-hand side. So like I said, we've got here on the chronograph, the entities are the taxis to which these observations correspond. And just like I showed you the time filtering in the graph, we can do the same on the MapWeave side. So both the network layer and the observations layer, in this case, you capture the date times on those observations, and that allows you to then, with the chronograph API, do things like this. You know, as I sort of zoom in on a particular day, I'm seamlessly kind of filtering that million observations down to just the ones that correspond to whatever time range I'm seeing on the timeline here. So let's run with that a little bit. So say I'm an analyst, you know, kind of, you know, coming at this problem, pattern of life problem. So there's a number of questions or a number of approaches that I might be sort of, you know, asking when I'm coming to this. Perhaps the simplest is, I already know who I'm interested in. I just want to find them here as fast as possible, look at their movements, and see whether I can spot if they're kind of, you know, co-locating with somebody, convoying with somebody, right? So chronograph gives us these built-in controls that allow us to do that. I can focus, as it's called, that focus control on a specific taxi. And in that case, I hide away all the other data and I turn those observations into trajectories. So these kind of automatically interpolated tracks through the observations for that taxi. The MapWeave API does all of that for me. And then I can do nice things like zoom in on one particular journey. And you'll notice I have this chronograph marker here, which remains in the middle of my timeline. And that marker, MapWeave has a corresponding now API. And as long as you tell it when is now, it can automatically place your network nodes, which don't have a fixed location, but they have the same ID as these observations. It'll automatically place them on that spot for you. And as you change now, well, in this case, the taxi kind of moves up and down its trajectory. Why does that matter? Well, there's also something we call pin in chronograph. So I can pin multiple taxis here. And I can start to do nice things like, as I said, sort of see, okay, are there ever times when these taxis are kind of hanging out, sort of, traveling the same routes, etc. Obviously, these days you probably want an algorithm to do that. But if an algorithm detects ones that are potentially, kind of convoying events, as the analyst, I can toggle those on and exactly play through that and sort of, get the real feel for those events happening, convince myself that they are real, right? So that's perhaps the easiest scenario where I know who I'm looking for. But very often I don't know who I'm looking for. Instead, something interesting has happened at a particular time, and I want to see who was around, right? So let's say someone of interest flew in to the airport here and the wee hours of August the 1st, right? So we kind of filter our data down, and we can use our GeoJSON layer in MapWeave coupled with the sort of various event handlers to create ourselves a little polygon drawing tool. And when I finish dragging that out, we create a spatio-temporal filter on this observation data set. So you'll notice now I have this, what we call a range marker here on chronograph, showing me this is the time you're filtering on. Here we've got our purple rectangle showing me the space we're filtering on. And notice how a lot of the other taxis have disappeared, because now we're only looking at the taxis which were observed within that space and that time. Now I can, of course, zoom out. I can see more observations, a wider sort of range of time. And that allows me to then do things like, okay, well, so one of these taxis potentially picked up my individual of interest. And then I know that person sort of left the Porto train station at some time the following evening. So we kind of, narrow in on that time, zoom in on our train station here, create another filter. And lo and behold, that takes us down to just 2 taxis. So again, as an analyst, now I've got something to kind of go on, right? All right, let's delete our filters and let's talk about the most difficult case. And that's the one where my time of interest is very long and my area of interest is very large. It's an entire city. And what the hell do I do? Well, this is again where chronograph comes to the rescue. By automatically aggregating up into a heat map, we lose the sense of any sort of events that are kind of occurring across things, right? So if we think back to the email example, right, when we aggregate up to a heat map, we no longer see who's exchanging emails, but we do see who has activity, right? Who has events on the timeline. And we also see the inverse. We see who doesn't have activity. So we can clearly see taxi 364 either had a very long holiday or very long service over here, right? Some gaps here for 483, another gap down here. So that's if our timeline is linear. What chronograph also allows us to do is what we call scale wrapping. So this is one line of code, right? And you just sort of flip the mode of chronograph, and you're still looking at exactly the same observations, but now on the timeline, you've wrapped those observations around the days of the week as they kind of recur throughout your data set. And that gives you a different sense of pattern of life. It shows you that actually taxi 304 doesn't normally work during the sort of daytime hours and evenings on Sundays. However, if I zoom right in, you're going to notice that there was this one event, this one time that they did a journey. Now that to me as an analyst is an outlier, right? Why? Why do they break their pattern of life that one time to go and have that journey? So now I've got them pinned. I'm going to switch off scale wrapping and I'm going to start to investigate. Well, where else did they go? Maybe I can figure out where's home. Maybe I can figure out if they're regular meeting with somebody else, etc., etc. So hopefully that gives you a sense of how together with chronograph and MapWeave, you can do large-scale pattern of life investigations, and there's very little custom UI tooling and things you actually need to build to make a really powerful application. A lot of what we do here just uses the existing built-in events and controls. All right, let's take it up one more step in terms of complexity. So this is a kind of a law enforcement example. And here we have, kind of combined our graph, currently very simple, just one node, our chronograph, and our, geospatial visualizations all in one. So let's talk through this. So we've got here a device that belongs to our prime suspect. Now, they are a suspect because they were observed, kind of in the vicinity of an incident of some kind. And what we're looking at here is we're looking at their sort of final approach to that incident based on the movement of their device. Now, you'll notice that when I zoom in, we've got this little range ring around this device, something we kind of created with the GeoJSON layer, sort of, I don't know, I can't remember what I set the radius to be, let's say sort of 25 meters or something like that. And so, and we're going to be kind of dragging our timeline, or, we can drag the phone as well, doesn't matter. The kind of MapWeave trackers work either way. And we're going to drag them along this approach, and we're going to be looking to see if they interacted with anybody that might also be of interest to our investigation. And the way we're going to do that is every time an observation comes into our range and that observation belongs to a journey which completely coincides with our suspect's final journey, we're going to light it up. We're going to light up that observation here, and we're also going to sort of add that temporary connection in on the graph. So in this case, we've sort of detected device 473 was in this area around this time. When I click on them, I will again, rather than seeing the individual observations, I will draw a trajectory automatically through them and actually plot where they were down that now line, that marker. So when our suspect was here, actually turns out this particular person or this device was all the way up here. So probably not of interest to us. Let's unselect them and keep going. And in this way, we're going to keep going. And you'll notice we've got this loitering zone. So we're going to kind of ignore every potential interaction before that, because then we've kind of observed that our suspect spends quite a lot of time in this loitering zone. So the hypothesis is, they're either waiting to meet somebody and kind of travel up together, or maybe they're picking something up from someone. Now, here's the other fun thing about MapWeave. We don't do the base maps. We're not the base map guys. That's not the value we add. MapWeave gives you adapters to your existing base map providers. And one of those could be Google Maps. Now, why does that matter? Well, it means that you get access to all the sort of existing features from that, like in this case, Street View. So if I'm interested in seeing, well, what is this area that this person's kind of loitering in? I'm able to do that here. Great. Okay. Quite a busy street. We've got a station over here. There are lots of people coming and going. We can clearly see that on our chart, right? Like devices kind of keep popping in and out. But we're not going to sort of select any of them. We're going to wait to see if they actually repeatedly hang out with somebody. So I wrote a little sort of, function within my UI, which just sort of every time one of these happens, I kind of log it. And I'm waiting to see if somebody repeatedly kind of hangs around my suspect. And as we sort of get to this kind of quieter area and then sort of head out towards the incident zone, we should see, there we go. Somebody was indeed detected by my little script. Device 419 repeatedly detected within range of the suspect. So this is one of our annotations, right? These can be kind of automatically drawn via the API, or you can kind of give the user control to sort of draw annotations around your nodes, and as well as events on the timeline. But I'm going to acknowledge that done. I'm going to toggle on device 419. And lo and behold, right, they are well within the range of our suspect. And not only that, if we scroll back our timeline to where their latest journey started, we'll notice it very much started in the loitering zone. So it looks like our suspect waited there, met up this additional device, and then they kind of traveled all the way up here, and look where their journey finishes, in the incident zone. So we have a new suspect, someone else that we can now investigate. One of the ways we can do that is we can go and look at the previous journey that they were sort of, we've got them highlighted now, so that's easy. We just go scroll back, where were they before they met our suspect here? Looks like they were sort of over here. So that's interesting. They were sort of approaching the loitering zone and then, I don't know, disabled their GPS, or maybe that's just a glitch in the data. Who knows? Well, let's follow it to the start to see where they kind of set off from, because that could be interesting to us. Let's go up here. All right, so up in this area, they started the journey. Let's go and see what's over there. Tram station by the looks of it, and looks like some kind of hotel or something up over there. So yeah, maybe that's something that I can kind of now follow up in my investigation as I keep going. So that's it for that demonstration. Hopefully that gives you a sense of how these three visualizations can come together for a complex sort of, kind of spatio-temporal kind of connected challenge. So let's go back to our slideshow. So we looked at these various examples. So let's wrap up and then head over to any questions that you might have. So as we've discussed, fused intelligence continues to be a key theme for intelligence solution providers, as well as for the end users. It does, in our sort of, from our perspective and from what we hear from our customers and partners, provide a challenge in terms of visualization, that goes beyond just link analysis. How do you bring these things together? And I think there's potential future opportunity here for kind of greater standardization on some of this user experience. Yeah, and with that, thank you very much, and over to any questions that we might have.
Thank you so much, Jan. That was an incredible run through. To kick things off, I'd love to take us back to a real-world setting. So thinking back to ISS in Prague, where we're exhibiting recently and where you delivered your presentation, how did this concept of multi-domain visualization actually resonate with the people you spoke to on the floor? So were they facing the exact kind of data fusing challenges we talked about today, or did something else stick out to them?
Yes. Raf, before I get to your question, I think we have one in the chat from Anis. So can the system be deployed independently on the end user platform, or does it require a continuous connection to a central server? Very good question, Anis. So our SDKs are purely front-end SDKs. So they're quite agnostic of the type of application that you want to host them on. I mean, obviously they are browser-based, so that's the one kind of key requirement. But it does mean that they don't care whether you deploy them as a SaaS application, whether you're deploying them, kind of in a hybrid model, or whether, as in the case of many of our government and intelligence customers, you want to deploy it in a complete siloed air gap, no connection to the outside internet. It works in all of those cases. How you choose to serve up the data to those visualization SDKs is really up to you. The only requirement is that it is the format of JSON that we expect, right? And that's all very clearly documented. It's a very simple JSON structure. I don't know if that kind of helps answer your question. And he's perfect. Yeah, great. You're welcome. Yeah, you're very welcome. Sorry, Raf, back to your question. So, how did this message resonate with people at ISS? I mean, look, really well. But I would say that where I think it resonated the most, and actually most of the people kind of attending and asking me questions at the talk were whom I would consider end users, right? So, again, ICE is a fantastic event for kind of interacting with various end users from various domains in intelligence, and they they absolutely get this, and they have this problem and they're seeing this challenge. They're faced with a myriad of, different signals intelligence, and other sources. And, they do genuinely have a problem to kind of draw conclusions from all the data that's being given to them. It resonates with the vendors too. But I think, as we were planning to kind of discuss here, like, a lot of the vendors are currently very preoccupied with AI, right?
I mean, that leads me perfectly to my second question. Because as we all know, you can go to any industry event right now without AI being the absolute center of gravity. So, how much did AI come up into those conversations and audience questions in Prague? And I'm really curious, what's the general feeling out there regarding chatbots and AI assistance in our industry, and specifically when it comes to visualization?
Yes, and again, I think there was, at least from my perspective, and keen to hear if you heard sort of otherwise from partners, but from my perspective, there was again a big difference in terms of the way the end users are kind of looking at AI and the sort of, how they might want to leverage it, versus I think the way the vendors, the system integrators are kind of, looking at this. I mean, in terms of the vendors, you're spot on for mentioning, chatbots. Like, everybody and their auntie, is integrating a chatbot into their solution. I think it's the kind of I don't want to be unfair, but there's sort of a little bit of the unimaginative, thing to kind of add in. What's the quickest, simplest thing we could add? Let's just pop a chatbot in, right? Where some of the things I've seen and the people I've talked to that I thought were really kind of compelling on that side were, for example, right, especially the platforms and the solutions that have been around, as long as us or longer. They're complicated beasts, right? There's a ton of functionality, rich feature sets, not to mention the myriad of different sort of signals and intelligence that are kind of being brought in for the user. So put yourself in the shoes of a completely new, user of this solution, right? Like, these things can be overwhelming, right? There's so much going on. And I've seen some fantastic ways that vendors are using, a simple chatbot or a kind of a very similar interface to just help that newbie user kind of navigate these solutions, get the most out of them for their particular questions, their particular cases, like as soon as possible. And where I think, where we had some very interesting conversations, and I think the way that this market kind of might go, in terms of what the role that visualization plays in, right now, most of these chatbots, the responses they're giving are, primarily verbal, right? I mean, that's what LLMs are kind of designed for. People are using them to summarize lots of data, lots of reports. They're using them to generate reports, thinking more in terms of that kind of government, NATO, etc. space. There's a ton of, standard formats for reports, and etc. that, are an absolute pain to kind of produce every time. These bots are fantastic at kind of just taking the stuff you give it, and turning it into that. But where I think there's an interesting and potentially very valuable, again, coming back to that kind of decision support, sort of use case, is the point at which they don't just spit out some words, right? But maybe they draw the visualization for you, right? Maybe they annotate the existing picture you've got there on the map, on the link analysis, whatever, with the annotations, with the things, draw your attention in, based on the sort of the learning and processing that they're kind of doing in the background. And I think that's a particularly exciting space. I think on the end user side, there's rightly a lot more trepidation, right? You're talking about people who, a lot of what the decisions they make, they might have to stand up in court at some point in the future and justify those, right? And stand by those. So there is a strong sense of ownership of the conclusions drawn and the decisions made, right? Whether that's, you know, a commander making battlefield decisions, whether that's, you know, a financial crime investigator kind of, you know, laying out their case, you know, for a particular investigation. Like, you know, these are serious decisions. They have to feel that ownership. And so I would say that from their perspective and from what I've heard, visualization is not going anywhere. It's one of the tools that actually helps them validate the stuff that these solutions, previously using, you know, more traditional algorithms and statistical methods, and now kind of more and more using AI, you know, it's to validate those, go and check it for themselves, you know, sort of sift through the noise and kind of, you know, focus on those few nodes, those few edges, those few observations on a map, and kind of reassure themselves that these are the correct conclusions, or that they're not, and then they need to go and do the manual lead work themselves, right? But you know, I would love to hear from other people on the call today, if they sort of, if this kind of perspective resonates, or if you feel different. I mean, this is just, these are my impressions from, you know, kind of that event, and sort of talking to use people.
Just adding to this and aligning AI to our toolkits. I mean, I work very closely with our partners, and they love our MCP service. So when I introduced it to them a few months ago, you got super excited. And
Right.
why don't you take us through our MCP service, maybe for those people on the webinar that haven't seen them before?
Oh, yes. And a very nice comment there from Maria. Thank you. Visualization helps you tell a story to the users. It's definitely key for less technical users. I 100% agree. Yes, so all of the toolkits you've seen today, they all come with their respective MCP servers. These are sort of hosted by us in the web. If you are a customer of ours, you've got access to them. For those of you who aren't in the know, these servers are a way to tell your code assistant. So this is something not targeted at your end users. This is targeted at your developers, right? So if your developers are using our toolkits to build out front ends for your applications, they can point their code assistant, whether that's in VS Code or in Claude Code or wherever they might be kind of, using an AI assistant to build solutions. They can sort of point their working environments to our MCPs, and it just helps the AI kind of understand our APIs, and again, that specific format of JSON that we require for our visualizations, so they can look at that automatically, and they can just sort of churn out code which will sort of work natively with our visualizations. It's a massive enabler. We did one of these public webinars a few months back where a colleague of ours, Kevin, live built one of these triple visualizations, like on the call from scratch. I mean, we have great APIs, we have great documentation. It didn't take a huge amount of time to do that manually, but you're still talking the order of days, whereas he did that in one call in 30 minutes, and they kind of interacted across each other, showed data across all of them. You can find that sort of, link to our webinar and the associated blocks on our website. I think it'll tell you everything you need to know about the MCPs.
Thank you. And I guess someone's typing in a question, so we can wait a minute.
Coming in from various people. We'll just give it a second. I did want to sort of throw that question, back at you a little bit, Raf. Besides the MCP servers, how is this kind of, this multi-domain, multimodal kind of visualization resonating with our partners? And maybe you could say a little bit about what are our partners, who are our partners, what can they do?
Yeah, so I mean, our partner ecosystem is very unique. So the vast majority of our partners are system integrators, solution providers, tech consultancies that are building mission-critical platforms, bespoke end-to-end systems and solutions, mainly to the public sector, but also to the private industry. So that's spanning across law enforcement, defense, national security, intelligence agencies, financial crime, and critical infrastructure projects all over the world. So when they talk to us about why they rely on the multimodal view, they emphasize two main realities. So the first one is that the single angle view is obsolete. So in today's threat landscape, relying on a single type of visualization, a single angle, or a minimal amount of data sources is simply no longer valid. So modern agencies are completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of data that they ingest daily. So if an analyst has to jump between isolated software screens to look at phone logs, then switch to another app for mapping and another for timelines, they lose the thread. So connections get missed and critical response times are delayed. So that takes us to the second point, which is the power of the three toolkits in one view. So this is why our partners rely on a fused multimodal approach. So they think they need link analysis, timeline, visualization, and geospatial living dynamically in a single view. So it allows an analyst, an investigator, so those are the end users of our partners to seamlessly move from one dimension of data to another without losing the context. So with our graph visualizations, it shows them who's connected to whom. So that can be in criminal network or infrastructure links. The geospatial view immediately maps out where those entities are operating in a physical world, and the timeline lets them filter the exact window of time and events to see when and how those physical movements and connections interacted. So by giving agencies or whatever the platform is, the ability to pivot between the who, where, and the when within a single interface. So our partners, they are helping them turn an overwhelming mountain of data into immediate and actionable intelligence. And we've seen that over the past few months and year, how is it moving from a single view or a single angle to a multimodal point of view.
Nice, nice. I'm glad it's resonating. Yeah, and we did a fantastic webinar with one of our partners, Future Space, recently as well. Which, for those interested, I'm sure there's a recording kicking about somewhere we can kind of share with you. But yeah, that was really great. Completely unprompted by us, they demonstrated on the call the sort of multimodal visualizations that they built for a kind of a I think it was like a drug smuggling type of scenario, and I think there was a sort of a cybersecurity angle as well. So yeah, no, really good stuff. Well, I think unless there are any more questions, oh, we got something from Brian. Just curious, are you able to protect these truly innovative concepts so that CI and its partners can make the claim it's the only set of toolkits that can do this? Well, yeah, there's a fun topic of protecting JavaScript there, Brian. I think it's it's the reason we got a sizable legal team. I think I'm not sure we've made that claim, but from what I've seen out there, in terms of GraphViz capabilities, at least, I think we've got the sort of the fullest suite of these kind of complementary visualizations. Obviously, there is an entire open source realm, where all of these things, apart from I reckon Chronograph, are sort of available in some shape or form. Then it's a sort of a standard, build or buy type question. That if if purchasing an SDK isn't justified, well then, yeah, I mean, there's not much to discuss at that point.
I want to add on how powerful our toolkits are, how it can help you scale what you're working on, how customizable they are as well. And one another point that makes us special, that the people who are developing those toolkits are also the same people who are supporting our partners and our clients. So that saves the developers of whether it's our clients or partners a big chunk of time waiting or searching for where can they find an answer for this problem or this challenge. We're very reactive as well to all of our clients and partners.
Nice. Thanks, Raf.
I guess we can take one more question. I see someone's typing.
Yeah, let's see. I'll give it another minute, but yeah. Otherwise, thinking about helping developers tell the right unbiased story. Do you provide any lessons learned in the docs from your experience, perhaps akin to GDS patterns? Really nice question, Tim. So there's a couple of ways that we go about this. So our when you evaluate our toolkits, or when you become a paying customer, you get access to the SDK sites for all the toolkits that you're licensing, and those include a myriad of examples of how you can use the various features. They also include, you know, these showcases that I've been sort of demonstrating now. They're all kind of our production showcases, so they kind of they show the power of these things, and they are all very much based off of the things we hear from our markets, you know, from the conversations, the type of data sets, you know, that our kind of customers encounter. But then you also get access to you know, our commercial development team. So they kind of support our customers throughout the pre-sales process. And, you know, they've seen it all, right? Like in terms of the types of challenges, types of data. So they are developers themselves. And then our support model, you know, for licensed customers is our developers. They are our support team. There's a rota for every single SDK. There's a person, you know, always on call, you know, and they are the developers who build our stuff, who've again encountered, you know, bugs, issues, feature requests from, you know, a myriad of our customers over the years. So they bring a wealth of experience to kind of support you with this development. Great question, Tim. Thanks.
All right. Well, I guess that brings us to the end of our presentation today. A huge thank you to you, Jan, for sharing such great insights and taking us through those live demos. And of course, a massive thank you to all of you in our audience for taking the time to join us today and asking questions. So if you'd like to explore how these multi-model visualization tools kits can fit into your own systems and workflows, we would love to connect. So you can reach us directly through our website. We will also be sending out the link of the recording of today's session over the next couple of days, as well as we're going to be posting it on our website. So feel free to share it with your teams. So thank you again for your time today. Have a fantastic rest of the day, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.